It's good to be here this morning. Like Susan said, this isn't something I normally do, but I do cherish the opportunities I have when I get invited to share. God has been good, and so what I'm going to share with you this morning, I think is fitting with what Glenn had shared with me, that you're working on the book of Esther. I've got a number of stories that I'm going to share with you this morning that I've been fortunate to be a part of. Some of them are my stories, and some are stories that I've been fortunate for people have shared with me. And so we'll be open to where God leads this morning. I do feel and sense His presence here this morning, and I'm really glad to be here. So yeah, as Susan has said, I've known Glenn and Susan for, I think figured out it's just a little over 20 years when we would have moved in 1995 across the road from Glenn and Susan. And very much have appreciated walking with them over the years. I had the opportunity to work closely with Susan, too, in Baden when we were looking at ways of reaching out to the community there. And just as my story, things don't always go the way you plan, but yet God is in it, and I'd do it all again. That's where I come from. So Esther is a pretty amazing story about stepping out in faith. And you shared this morning about walking on a path where you don't know necessarily where it's going to go, but being open to God's leading and being faithful in that, and then seeing what God does with that. As I was preparing this morning, the devotional this morning out of a book called Jesus Calling, I thought was so fitting. This is a book by Sarah Young. I don't know if any of you are familiar with it. She comes from a perspective of sharing God's heart to us, and she shares it as if God is speaking to us. It's been a wonderful book. I really do enjoy reading this book and getting up in the morning. I don't get to do it every morning. I'm working on that. But yet the mornings I am faithful and do it. It's been pretty amazing. The story I will share a little bit later about meeting a gentleman in Phoenix by the name of Akeen. That morning, it was as I read my Jesus Calling, and it was on Romans 8 about being Spirit-led, that as I dwelled on that, God led. And we'll get to that a little later. So I'll read from today's devotional. I am the creator of heaven and earth, Lord of all that is and that will ever be. Although I am unimaginably vast, I choose to dwell within you, permeating you with my presence. Only in the spirit realm would someone so infinitely great live within someone so very small, be awed by the power and glory of my spirit within you. Though the Holy Spirit is infinite, He deigns to be your helper. He is always ready to offer assistance. All you need to do is ask. When the path before you looks easy and straightforward, you may be tempted to go it alone instead of relying on me. This is when you are in the greatest danger of stumbling. Ask my Spirit to help you as you go each step of the way. Never neglect this glorious source of strength within you. So I've had an interesting journey. It hasn't always gone the way I figured it was going to go. One of my times that I cherish through this walk has been when I was working with Max, the insurance company. I had the opportunity to head up the mutual aid ministries. It was a pretty amazing job. I got to give away money. The organization set aside funds to work with families in need, and those needs were often outside the insurance realm. And so I got to work with churches, with individuals to meet those needs. And I had a great group of guys with me. I always say, you are who your tribe is. And I had a couple amazing gentlemen, three of them in particular, that we worked very closely together. And we had the opportunity to go down to Pennsylvania. We were at a retreat down there and had laid out the agenda for the week. We had all these things we needed to work on. And the first couple of days went well, and the last morning I woke up, and there were a number of things we needed to do, but I just had a sense that we need to set the agenda aside, and let's spend some time in prayer together. And it was a couples retreat. The three other guys, their wives were along. My wife wasn't able to join us that time. But we got together that morning for breakfast. And so one by one, I went to them and said, I was wondering if you would join us this morning for our meeting. And Nelson Shifley, I know many of you know Nelson, his wife Joy was there. And Joy says, oh, no, Tim, I don't want to be a part of any meetings. And I had to tell her, no, it won't be a meeting. I just want to spend some time in prayer together and seeking God's will for us as individuals and for us as an organization. And she said, oh, I can do that, she said. And so I went to the other two wives as well, and they were certainly on board with that. So we had our time of breakfast together, and it just kind of naturally led into us having some discussion and time of prayer. And there was three things that God showed us that morning that I'd like to share with you. It's been a part of my journey. And the first one was, do not worry. There's so many things that can bog us down that when you don't allow God into the situation and you take it upon yourself, I think naturally we tend to worry. And we think, what about the past? What about the future? There's so many things we can get caught up on. And God just said, do not worry. And out of that, the reason you don't have to worry is because, number 2, we have the ability to ask, and he will listen. Ask, and you shall receive. And so, as you begin that worry, it's a matter of setting that aside, and going back to God, and casting your cares on him, and asking him for what your needs are, and he will listen. And the third one, it fits so well with where the service has already gone this morning, was he showed us that he is leading, he is guiding. We are on a path where you don't necessarily know where the destination is. And that's okay. All we're called to do is step out in faith each day, trusting him that he will lead each day. And where it goes, that's up to him, but trusting him, it's going to be good. One of the ladies in our church the one Sunday morning, a couple weeks after I got back, it was so cool. Sort of, God always seems to confirm things for you. When he's speaking, it's not just once, it often comes again. And she shared what had been shared with her that week. She was to see a counselor, and this was part of her struggles as to worrying about the future. And she said, the example she gave, which has been so cool, it's like walking down a foggy road, where each time you take a step, you can see a little bit further. But you still can't see where you're going, but you got to keep moving. And as you walk, God will reveal that next step for you. And she said the other cool one that was new to it was God will also spring up little signs of new life on that path, that you'll confirming that you're on the right path. And as I put that back into over the years and walking, it's so cool. Sometimes you have to look back. You don't necessarily see those things right away. God was with you, and he will confirm those things with you. So, after coming back from that retreat, one of the things I was really got a sense that weekend was that I had the opportunity to give away funds. I got the opportunity to work with churches, and yet there were so many people behind me that made that happen, and had a sense that I'd love for them to be able to be a part of that, to get to experience what I was doing. So I was down, it was in Oakville. I met with took a couple connections, but he was the strategic partner coordinator, I think was his title. So many different titles, with the Meeting House. That's the church that meets in movie theaters, I guess, all across Ontario. And I was looking at ways that we could be working with them. And they came back and said, well, Tim, the money that you have available is neat, but it's not really needed. We have a program where within our cell groups, the house leaders, we give them $100 that they can take and use within. So we often did matching. And so he's saying for you to match our $100 gift to make it $200 really doesn't make a lot of sense. It's not about the money. It's about having something there and knowing that people care. And so out of that, I went away and got thinking about that and thought, maybe this is my opportunity for me to be able to work with our staff, for them to be able to experience what I get to do by giving them $100, just like these guys, the pastors there had said, we've met so many needs with $100. And you think $100, what will that do? But I liked the idea, and as I prayed about it, I thought, this is something I'd like to do. So I took it to my boss, Dave Wine, who's still the president and CEO of Max. They were down in Kansas City. The head office is down there, and I was part of the executive team. He said, Tim, this is bigger than just you and I. I would like you to present this idea to the executive team and get their blessing on this before we move ahead. So I went down, it would have been October a number of years ago, and met with them. We had meetings planned that week. It was the Monday morning, I guess it was down, and I was scheduled for the end of the day to share this idea. And it was only about 3:30 in the afternoon, which was unusual for us to wrap up, but it had been a long day. We'd dealt with a lot of things, and Dave said, Tim, would you be okay waiting till tomorrow to share your idea? And I said, that's fine by me. And we were able to leave a little early, which I was happy with. As I left the boardroom, our claims manager came up to me and said, Tim, I have something for you. I said, yeah, what's that? And she said, I had a call from a lady last week or 2 weeks ago. I'm not sure. There was a bit of time lag in there. But she said she called to tell me that she had had a house fire in 1992. And part of the insurance proceeds she received were for her house contents. But at the end of the day, she was able to clean up a lot of her house contents and was able to keep them and never had to replace them. She said, I've been feeling guilty about this. And before I leave this earth, I want to make things right. What do I need to do to make things right? And Christy, our claims manager, said, well, in 1992, Max didn't exist. There was a previous aid union that you would have dealt with, and they've long been dissolved. So rest assured, your conscience can be cleared. And that was it. Later that afternoon, the same lady called back again and said, no, you don't understand. I want to do something. So she shared with her the Mutual Aid Ministries program that we had, the fact that we had a charity, and said, if you'd like to make a donation, you're more than welcome. Well, that afternoon, she handed me a check for $8,000, which is exactly what I needed to give everybody $100. It was like, wow. So I got to go back the next day and share this with the team. And so I was explaining what I was thinking, and I'm not sure they were getting it. They didn't quite make the connection between $100 and insurance. And that's understandable. I was okay with that. But when I got to the story of, plus the money just arrived yesterday afternoon, that we need to make this happen, they couldn't say no. And so out of that, it was neat. My ideas of how it was going to work as we worked together as a team changed and evolved. At the end of the day, I was just going to give it to them and let them do with it and never ask another question. But then because it was a donation, we realized that we were accountable to the IRS and CRA here in Canada to report how that money was spent. So ended up, I was able to give them the $100, made it optional to participate, which I had 100% participation, but mandatory to share your story. And this is where I got many neat stories where I was able to, again, not what I'd planned, but it's been so much better this way. So I went back down in December, the beginning of December, shared it with the team, was able to hand out the money. I'd worked with our marketing manager down there too, and how does this look? And my sense was too that this $100 wasn't going to be it. It wasn't about the money. It's going to open more doors too for us to be able to help people. And so I wanted to put something on there with the contact information on it, just so that it wasn't promotion. I didn't want it to be, hey, look what we're doing. It was just, if there's something you need to reach out, you need to connect with somebody, here's my name and number. And she picked that up right away, and that afternoon said, I want to put a little slip of paper in, Tim. And on it says, she had a quote, and it was, no one will understand how far a small act of kindness will go. And she said the author of that quote was Rachel Joy Scott. And she asked me if I knew that name, and I didn't. And she told me she was the first person killed in the Columbine shootings. And this was a saying that her parents had found in her journals when they were cleaning her room. And again, that's been a part of the stories. What it's done, you just never know. The following day, after I had handed out the funds, our marketing manager comes and says, Tim, I've gave it away already. And she had met that evening, the day, and then handed out in the morning. That evening, she had gone out with a group of mothers. They always got together every so often just to get away from the kids. And they were meeting, and the one lady shared her story. She said, my next door neighbor, who I work with, shared with me just this week that her husband had lost her job. And she opened up with me, and I want to do something, but I know she won't accept money from me, because that's not why she shared with me. And I don't even want to help her that way, because I don't want to spoil what we have. But yet, she has a need, and I know God can meet that need. And her name was Karen. Karen, right away, she knew the $100 I got, here's the recipient. And so she pulled it out of her purse, slid it across the desk, explained it to her. And so the lady said, I have to give it to her, but I'm not sure if she will still even accept this from me. And so Karen talked to me. She said she was going to see her on the next Monday morning at school. And over lunch hour, she would try to give it to me. So I got the story in the morning, that Monday morning. And so Karen and I both said, we'll be praying that she will accept this gift. And so when she handed her the money, she opened it up, and she saw the envelope, and she saw the little saying on there. And she was encouraged by it and thought that was the gift. And so she accepted it. And then later that afternoon, she came back up to Karen, or this other lady, Karen's friend, tapped her on the shoulder and said, do you know there was $100 in that envelope? It was so cool that God had got it in her hands without even knowing what she had received. A couple weeks later, Dave Wine, my boss, said, "Tim, I got to share my story with you." And I thought, that's pretty cool when the boss gets it. Him and his wife often worked from home, and they were working the one morning, and they kept hearing this banging noise, a hammer banging, and there was some construction going on. They were renovating, I think, within their condo unit, and so it was something that they'd been putting up with, but that morning it bothered him. And so he said he looked out the window, and I saw a gentleman out in the dumpster banging away, and he got his back up. He's like, this can't be. He can't be doing this. And so he got up and he started heading out to tell this gentleman that he needed to stop. And as he was going out the door, he said it was almost like a buzzing in his head. He just had a sense to stop. And God told him, that's the gentleman who money is meant for. Dave turned around, headed back in. He said he went out the door with a totally different mindset from what he was originally going. He gets to the gentleman in the dumpster and asks him what he's doing. And he explains that he had lost his job. He was trying to raise some money, 1, for gas for his vehicle for the week, and 2, to buy his kids some Christmas gifts. And there was refrigeration coil in the dumpster that was in the dumpster. It was going to waste, and he wanted to save it, but he couldn't recycle it with the refrigeration coil on. He was trying to knock it off. And so that Dave knew that this was it. So he pulled out his $100 and handed it to him. And the first words out of the gentleman's mouth were, "Thank you, Jesus." It wasn't, "Thank you, Dave." He didn't even know Dave. He said it 3 times. Then he turned and gave Dave the biggest hug. Dave said that was pretty amazing. And you get to be a part of what God's doing. And you see, oftentimes in that path, you don't get to see what God's doing. But when he shows you, he gives you those opportunities to see what he's doing, and you get to be a part of it. That's pretty cool. So a month had gone by, and I had the opportunity to share some of these stories with the whole team. We used to do a monthly call-in. And so I just randomly picked 4. Well, I've got one other little one I'll share too that was pretty neat. I think I picked it that morning too. It was a lady, one of the ladies had gone in, and there was 5 $20 bills in the envelope. We didn't know if it would be given all at once or if God gave you opportunities. And so she was in a dollar store right before Christmas, and a lady came up to her and says, "I have a question for you. I've got," see if I can remember my story now. I think it was $5. I have $5 to buy a gift for my son. And she had 5 little things picked out and said, "Should I put one back so I can spend $1 to buy wrapping paper? Or should I give him the 5 gifts?" and she said right away, she says, "Oh, you got to buy wrapping paper. That's part of it is opening the gift." And as she said that, she went, "Hey, I can do even better." And so she pulled out her envelope and handed the lady a 20 and said, "Here you go." And the lady said, well, come with me so I can give you your change back." And she said, "No, it's yours." And right there in the store, they just gave her a big hug. They wept. And she said it just, again, blew her away, that opportunity that God presented, her coming out of the blue and being able to help her that way. So the following month, I just picked, I don't know how many stories I had already. I picked 4 random ones. And as I shared them, I just had this sense again, it's not about the story. These are wonderful stories, but it's not about trying to get a story. As God leads you to give. And if the story is you're walking through the mall and you feel you need to give this money to somebody, give it. End of story, I'm okay with that. That is so cool. It's not about the story. And as we got off the call, I got a call right away from our sales manager down in Virginia. And she said, "Tim, I haven't had a chance to tell you my story yet, but what you shared with the team was so fitting this morning." And later that afternoon, she sent me her story. So she had actually been in the Kansas City office the day that I handed out the money, and she said she remembered as I handed it to her that she knew it was for Christmas gifts. It was the beginning of December. That made sense. She said it was the Tuesday before Christmas, and that morning she woke up and thought, I wonder if I missed my chance. And didn't think too much more about it, but she said that evening her and her son went out for supper and had ate, paid the bill, left the tip, left the restaurant, and as she got in her car, God told her, "That's the person you're supposed to give it to." So she told her son, "I'm heading back in. I'll be back shortly." So she headed into the restaurant, had the waitress paged, and the waitress meets her at the door, and she hands her the envelope. And the lady takes it and doesn't even open it. She just takes it and immediately starts to sob and weep and gives her this biggest hug and starts thanking her. And she didn't understand. She didn't know what had happened. But she left and went back out, told her son, I don't know what happened there, but that was obviously meant to be. And thought that was, she told me, she thought that was the end of her story. Sunday morning, she's at church. I think she was part of the worship team. She was up the front, and she sees the same lady she's never seen in her life come walking in the back door of the church with 2 young kids in tow. The lady came looking for her. She had to tell her story. Said that afternoon she had stopped and prayed that God would look after her kids. She didn't have any money for Christmas gifts. And I prayed that God would provide. So when someone out of the blue came and handed her something, she knew God had answered her prayers. That was enough. Said she took the envelope, went back to the washroom to collect herself, opened it up and realized what it was, and was blown away and made a beeline back out to tell her, and she was gone. And as she was thinking about it, she had been to that church on one other occasion and thought, there's a chance I might be able to find her. I need to do that. And came that morning to tell her story. She was a single mom. Her husband was in jail. She was making $3.15 an hour waitressing, plus her tip money. And it had been a slow couple of weeks, and she just didn't have the extra funds she needed. She wasn't sure how she was going to pay the bills, let alone buy Christmas gifts. And God answered her prayers. So the stories continued to come in, and it was so neat felt the sense of just a small part of what God's doing, to be able to see that. And as I started sharing some of the stories, people would say, Tim, you got to write a book. And I didn't know what to do with that. I'm not an author. I'm an accountant. But I had the opportunity a number of years back, been 3 years ago now, to attend Mennonite Church USA down in Phoenix, Arizona. And I'd been to a number of the Mennonite conferences across Canada representing Max, but I'd never been down to the States. And so I asked Dave, what do I do? And he says, Tim, just pray that God will lead you to those people that he has for you. I said, I can do that. And so headed down, and I get on the airplane in Toronto already. And as I walk on the plane, Willard Metzger, head of Mennonite Church Canada, is sitting in the first class section of the plane. And I was like, Willard! And so I took my seat in the back of the plane. And so when we landed down in Phoenix, Willard's waiting for me at the gate. And he wanted to explain to me why he was sitting in first class. And he had saved his points from the many travels, and so he said he'd cash them in on the longer flights and use his personal points to upgrade his seat. And so again, that was one of those connections that I wasn't expecting. But Willard and I got to walk through the airport together, and I shared a number of in fact, I think the only story I shared with him at that point was the $8,000 and how it had arrived in my $100 stories that I had. And he said, well, let's get together. I'd like to hear more. So we went for coffee. I think it was the Monday morning. And he really picked up on the point of when God is at work and we're a part of it, how cool is that? To see God in action, and he has a real heart for being missional, for reaching out, he said. These stories are missional. They're about reaching out and meeting needs that God leads you to. He said, we got to tell you stories. So he'd connected me with the head of Menno Media down in the States, and so we had met on the Wednesday afternoon, shared with him, and as I left there, I was like, wow, this has been neat. Thursday morning, I wake up. I'm on the 18th floor of my apartment in downtown Phoenix, and I was thinking about the conversations we had about being Spirit-led, and the devotional that morning out of the Jesus Calling was about being Spirit-led, and it was an interesting morning. That morning, I had woke up and I had so many thoughts in my mind, things I had to do. I think it was 5 in the morning. I was still the 3-hour time difference. I was going to start answering emails. I had ran the booth until 11 o'clock the night before. I came home, I was exhausted. A number of things to catch up, and but again, being Mennonite, I didn't want to spend the money on the internet for one more day because I was leaving the next morning to go golfing with my buddies down there. And so I thought, no, I'm going to wait till, figured I'd leave by about 8 o'clock. I'll wait till 8 o'clock before I log in. So I thought, it's a good time to do my devotional. So I pull up my devotional, I read through it, and one of the scriptures in the bottom was Romans 8. And so I started to read it, but I realized I wasn't really reading it. I was doing it, but I wasn't really doing it. I was still thinking about the emails I needed to send, the things I had to do. So I stopped myself and started again. So I start going through, I'm reading it, and about halfway through I realized I've done it again. I'm still not getting it. So stopped and prayed, and I read through the third time, and it was, wow, that is pretty cool. I want to be Spirit-led. I want God to lead me. Just like these stories, I want those opportunities. So as I finished, I prayed the Lord's Prayer. I was standing at the window in my apartment, or in my motel room, and I looked down, and a gentleman walking to the corner caught my eye. And Glenn, here's maybe the gentleman that I met. His name is Akeen. He walked up to the corner, and I felt I need to go talk to him. And I thought, okay, that's crazy. I know I just prayed that I want to be Spirit-led, but now I'm doing something crazy that's going to look like God led me. And so I blew it off. I walked away from the window, and I had this sense then as to, I wonder if he's still there. So I walked back to the window again, and sure enough, he was still standing there. And I thought, well, I'm going to watch him. I'm going to wait for the light to change, and I'm going to see him walk away, and I'll know. And I watched, and the light changed both ways, and he was still standing there, and I still went, that's crazy. And so, again, I walked away from the window, and the third time it came, you need to go talk to him. So I figured by the time I got dressed and down, he'd be long gone, but I can be obedient. So I got dressed, headed down, get out around the corner, and he was a block away. As I turned the corner, he was still standing there. I went, crap, now what? And I just had a sense, well, I can still walk towards him. I'd go for my morning walk, I often did, and he'll never know I'm coming to see him. And so I started walking towards him, and as I got closer, I noticed he had a small Bible in his hand, and I just knew that, okay, I got to stop. But I didn't even know what to say. So I got up to him, and I said, I believe you have a word for me. And he kind of didn't know what to say. He stepped back, and I was, at that point, I was shaking. I was like, this is so foreign for me. But he stepped back, and then even the song today was so cool. He opened his Bible, and he started reading Psalms 23, which is one of my favorite scriptures. It was the one Dad was reading when he had a stroke when I got to the hospital. He was reciting Psalms 23 as he laid in the hospital bed. And so Akeen starts reading Psalms 23, and it was just like, this peace came over me, and God said, just listen. And just like that, it was just so peaceful. He finished reading Psalms 23, and he starts to share his testimony with me. He was a homeless gentleman living in the streets of Los Angeles, and he'd been there for a number of years, and he said he was always a light sleeper. He could never sleep well on the streets. And he said, at one point I found a dumpster that I could pull the lid down on. He could crawl inside, and he could pull the lid down. It was quite enough that he could sleep. But he always woke up before the truck came. He always heard it. That was never an issue. Until one morning. He said he woke up as he was being dumped into the back of the truck. And he said he was covered in garbage. He sort of righted himself, brushed himself off, and then he started to yell. And he said he heard the click, and the compactor started. The morning I saw him, he was wearing a tunic. He told me, Tim, this is the same tunic I was wearing that day in the dumpster. He says, as it crushed him, he started to bleed out his neck and out his wrists. And he showed me the bloodstains on his tunic. And then he said, but I somehow survived. And he said the truck started to drive again, stopped at the next place that opens up, the next dumpster load comes in. And he again started yelling, but the driver never got out of the truck. And then he heard the same click. And as it was crushing him the next time, he said, I didn't know God, but the only thing I knew what to do was to cry out to God to save his life. God, spare me. And it stopped. And the driver somehow heard him, knew to stop it. God knows. But he said the truck driver came and pulled him out of the back, and he says, I don't understand. He says, there's no way you should be alive. I know what I put in that truck and what happens to it. Once, let alone twice. He said he couldn't explain it. And Akeen said, I knew that day that God had a plan for my life. He said, I always knew I was different, but that day I embraced my difference. It was okay being different. God has a plan for my life. We stood in that corner for, I don't know, looking back, I'm not sure what time I went down. I'm thinking it's somewhere in the ballpark of 2 hours. I shared some of my stories with him, and he shared some amazing stories with me of how God had led him. One of my favorite, too, was one morning, it was tough, he said, being on the streets, trying to find a church. He wanted to go to church, but he said he always had his belongings with him, and he wasn't looked too kindly on. But he said one morning he prayed that God would lead him to a church. And he said God showed him that day he would meet a gentleman with one arm, and his name would be Richard. And Richard is going to help you. So, again, Akeen, throughout the day, I'm not sure if he was looking for a guy with one arm, but he ran into a guy with one arm, and sure enough, his name was Richard. And Richard invited him to his church. And he said it was wonderful. He got tied into that church and attended there for quite a few years. The day I met him, he was working. Eventually, at one point when I first got there, he looked at his watch. And my first thought was he's waiting for his parole officer to show up. But he told me, no, I got to get to work. And so he had to watch the time. He had just started a new job and didn't want to be late. And so it was about 7:45, I think, finally. We wrapped up. His word for me, too, that was pretty cool. It was, Tim, God is opening doors that no man can close, which has been so cool through my journey the last number of years when I think God has opened a door, and he has, but it's closed in ways that I wasn't expecting. But yet, God has a plan. And so as he left, he gave me the biggest hug, and off he went. And said, Tim, he told me where he works. He was up around the corner, not too far from where we were. And he said, if you have a chance, I'd love to see you yet. Well, that was on the Friday. I was heading down. My wife has cousins down there, and we were golfing for the weekend. I didn't think I'd necessarily have a chance to see him again. But he did tell me, Tim, I've started working now, and when I have enough money, the first thing I'm going to buy is a cell phone, and my first call is going to be to you. And so about 3 weeks later, he did call me, and that was enough that morning. I'm thinking, we made the connection here, and we'll be able to stay in touch. But the Monday morning, woke up, and I was up early again, and my wife's cousins had been off to work. So I thought, I'll head back into Phoenix. And as I'm going there, I was thinking again about what had happened. I had 2 questions I had for Akeen that I thought, I need to go find him. I never asked him that morning what he was doing on the corner. And 2, this story has been so amazing that I want to be able to ask him if he's okay if I share what happened that morning. And so I got to work. He wasn't there. Talked to a gentleman. He said, yeah, he should be back. He told me he actually lived. The boss who had given him a job had found a trailer for him and had set him up to get him off the streets. And so I knew he was there, but he'd gone for a walk. He often went for a prayer walk, he told me. So I went for breakfast, and they messed up my order. They brought some of my food ready for me, and they brought some in a to-go container, but it took a while for them to get that one. So as I finished, I was already full, and I thought, well, this food must be for Akeen. It's already packed up and ready to go. I'm full. So I meet him, and I offer him the food, and he turned me down. He said, Tim, my dad is a witch doctor, and he had tried to poison him a couple times. And he says, so I've made a vow that I won't eat any food unless I know where it came from. And that was fine. And we talked, but I said, I do have a couple questions for you. And I said, the first one, I need to know, what were you doing in the corner that morning? And he said, Tim, that's easy. I woke up that morning. I've never been to that corner in my life, but God told me to go stand there. And I said, well, then why weren't you ready for me? And he said, I thought someone was coming to help me. But when you came in and asked for help, he hadn't done that for a while. And that's been the basis of our friendship. It's been so mutual. It's been such a blessing. And we still stay in touch. I was hoping he'd text me this morning. It's been cool. And he did. He texted me yesterday. When God's at work and is doing something, he knows. and he sends me an encouraging email. At one point, after we connected, I was sending him prayer requests. As I was working with families, I had my buddy Akeen that I could send a text, and I knew he'd be praying for it. And remember the one night calling him up. We actually talked on the phone that time. He was still in Phoenix. He says, "Tim, I'm living the dream." And I'm thinking, I know you're back on the streets again. He threw his back out shortly after we had met and ended up losing his job. And he'd been sending all his money back home, so right away he was back on the street again. But he says, "Tim, I'm living the dream." And I'm thinking, wow, what happened? What has changed? He says, "You're feeding me prayer requests." That's what I want to do. I want to pray for people. To him, that was living the dream. But as things, like I said, not always gone the way I think you're going to go, he's been such a source of strength for me. Sending me a text, sending me a scripture verse that God's laid on his heart. It's been such a neat connection. So as I've heard these stories, people have shared their real life. I know these stories are real. And one is, how can you not know that God is real? There's so many coincidences that it's beyond belief. You know that God is real and that he is alive and his Spirit works with us each and every day when we ask. To me, it's amazing as I wake up in the morning, and again, just like I don't do my devotions every morning, but when I take that time and I pray, "God, lead me today. Bring those people that you have for me. Make those connections." It's amazing how often they happen. And I've often wondered, is it because I prayed that God has brought them to me? Or is it just I'm more aware of what's happening and I would have otherwise missed it? And my conclusion has been that it's both. God is real. He's listening. He wants us to ask. And he will lead. Just like Esther. She stepped out in faith, not knowing what the consequences would be. And that was big faith. And God was real. God was there for her. God provided. So just to go back to, again, the last line I love this morning of the devotional. Never neglect this glorious source of strength within you. God is with you, and may he be.